Feed a cold, starve a fever. Cracking your knuckles gives you arthritis. Sit too close to the TV and you'll ruin your eyes. Swallow gum and it sits in your stomach for 7 years. Grandma had a rule for everything. And most of us grew up believing every single one of them without ever questioning where they came from. Some of these sayings are pure nonsense. Some of them, surprisingly, hold up under real scientific scrutiny. Today we're testing 8 of the most common health beliefs passed down through American households and finding out once and for all which ones are actually true. Before we get into individual tales, it helps to understand where they came from in the first place. For most of human history, there was no easy way to look something up. No doctor on every corner, no internet, often not even a working phone in the house. What people had instead was observation, passed down generation to generation, refined slowly through trial and error inside a single family or a single small town. Some of these sayings were genuinely rooted in careful, repeated observation and held up remarkably well once modern science eventually caught up centuries later. Others were educated guesses that happened to be wrong, but sounded reasonable enough at the time to stick around anyway. And a few were simply misunderstandings. A coincidence mistaken for a cause, repeated so many times across so many kitchen tables that it hardened into accepted fact. The interesting part isn't just sorting true from false, one by one. It's understanding why each one made sense to the people who first believed it, because most of them weren't guessing randomly. They were doing the best they could with what they had. Feed a cold, starve a fever. This one is centuries old, and it turns out to be half right. Modern research suggests there's real truth to eating during a cold. Your body needs energy and nutrients to fight off a standard upper respiratory infection, and warm fluids like soup genuinely help clear congestion, soothe a sore throat, and keep you hydrated. The starve a fever half doesn't hold up quite as well. A fever also burns extra energy, sometimes more than usual. So deliberately avoiding food during one isn't the right move either. Doctors today generally agree the old advice got the mechanism only half right. The real modern version is simpler than the old rhyme. Stay hydrated, eat when your body wants to, and don't force restriction either way, cold or fever. Verdict: partly true, and the part that's outdated is easy to update without losing the spirit of the advice. Cracking your knuckles causes arthritis. This is one almost every household repeated, usually aimed at a kid who wouldn't stop cracking their knuckles at the dinner table. And it turns out to be false. The sound itself is just gas bubbles collapsing inside the fluid that lubricates your joints. Nothing structural is actually happening in there. There's a well-known story of a doctor who tested this theory on himself for over 60 years, deliberately cracking the knuckles on one hand for decades while leaving the other hand alone, and found no measurable difference in arthritis between the two by the end of his life. It might not be a great habit for other small reasons. Some people find it mildly irritating to be around, but it will not give you arthritis. Verdict: false, but it made for a remarkably convincing threat at the dinner table for generations. Sitting too close to the TV ruins your eyes. Every kid growing up in the television era heard this one at least once a week. And while sitting close to the TV won't cause any permanent eye damage, it does often cause temporary eye strain, headaches, dryness, and difficulty focusing afterward. Interestingly, kids often naturally sit closer to screens because their eyes can comfortably focus at shorter distances than an adult's can, not because something was already wrong with their vision. The bigger, more modern concern doctors actually point to isn't distance at all. It's total screen time and the lack of regular breaks to let your eyes refocus on something farther away. So Grandma had the wrong mechanism, but the right instinct underneath it. Don't stare at any screen for hours without looking away. Verdict: mostly false, but accidentally onto something real. Carrots improve your night vision. This one has a surprisingly specific origin story. Carrots are genuinely rich in vitamin A, which is essential for healthy vision. So there's real truth buried in here. But the popular version of this tale got wildly exaggerated during World War II, when British fighter pilots publicly credited their unusual success at night fighting to eating extra carrots, partly to distract the public and the enemy from the fact that they were actually using newly developed radar technology they didn't want revealed. The truth sits in the middle. Carrots do support general eye health, especially if you happen to be deficient in vitamin A, but they will not give you extraordinary night vision beyond your normal baseline. Verdict: true in principle, wildly overstated in the version that actually got passed down. Going outside with wet hair will make you sick. Colds are caused by viruses, not by temperature or wet hair directly. So on a strict technical level, this one is false. But there's a reasonable piece of logic sitting underneath it. Being cold and damp for an extended period can mildly suppress parts of your immune response, and cold weather in general is exactly when people spend far more time indoors, in closer contact with each other, which is precisely when viruses spread most easily from person to person. So wet hair itself isn't really the cause of getting sick. But the season it usually happens in absolutely does correlate with higher cold and flu rates, just for entirely different underlying reasons than the one Grandma had in mind. Verdict: false cause, but a genuinely true correlation hiding behind it. An apple a day keeps the doctor away? This might be the most famous health saying in American history, and it's held up better than almost any other one on this list. Apples are genuinely high in fiber, vitamin C, and antioxidants, and diets rich in whole fruit are consistently linked to lower rates of heart disease and better long-term health outcomes in study after study. That said, no single food, apple or otherwise, can substitute for a generally balanced diet, and modern researchers are quick to point out that the phrase works better as a symbol than a literal prescription. It's less about the apple specifically, and more about what the apple represents. Real, simple, minimally processed food, eaten regularly, as part of an ordinary day rather than a special effort. Verdict: true in spirit, and one of the rare old sayings that's aged almost perfectly. Swallowed gum stays in your stomach for 7 years. This is one of the most repeated childhood warnings in American homes, and it's completely false. Gum isn't digested the same way food is, since your body can't break down its rubbery base. But that doesn't mean it just sits there for years. In reality, it passes through your digestive system within a matter of days, the same as anything else your body can't fully digest. The 7-year number appears to have been invented purely to scare kids into not swallowing it on purpose. Verdict: false but remarkably effective parenting. Sugar makes kids hyperactive. This might be the most surprising one on the entire list, because it's one nearly every parent still believes today, decades later. But multiple controlled studies, including ones where parents were deliberately told their child had eaten sugar when they actually hadn't, and vice versa, found no measurable difference in behavior tied to sugar itself. What actually drives the hyper effect that parents swear they see is almost always the situation sugar tends to show up in: birthday parties, holidays, family celebrations, environments that are already loud, exciting, and overstimulating regardless of what's sitting on the table. Verdict: false, but understandably convincing to anyone who's watched a 5-year-old at a birthday party. Looking back at all 8 of these together, a clear pattern shows up. The tale's rooted in something real. Feed a cold, the apple a day, carrots and vitamin A. Almost always came from generations of ordinary people paying close, patient attention to what actually happened around them year after year. The false ones almost always came from fear, from wanting a child to behave, or from a simple coincidence that got repeated so many times it eventually hardened into accepted fact. None of that makes Grandma's advice worthless, even the parts that turned out to be wrong. It means the instinct behind most old wives' tales, noticing patterns, and caring enough about someone to pass down a warning, was almost always coming from a good place. Which of these did you grow up hearing? And which one did your family swear up and down was absolutely true? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you enjoyed sorting fact from fiction today, subscribe, because we've got a lot more old sayings left to put to the test.